Divisional matchups are always going to be challenging matchups, but this game was absolutely the Eagles' game to lose, and boy did they lose it. Giving up a loss to the Dallas Cowboys with a final score of 24-21. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. The Eagles collapsed after the first quarter, allowing the Cowboys to score 24 unanswered points, coming away with a walk-off field goal to win this game. And I want to start off by saying that the first quarter of this game really set the tone for how we would expect the Philadelphia Eagles to play day in and day out. The Philadelphia Eagles went out, they scored 14 points, 111 total net yards, 90 of which came through the air. Jalen Hurts was 9 for 13 in the passing game in the first quarter. The Eagles were firing on all cylinders. Saquon Barkley was doing decently. I mean, the run game wasn't great over the course of the game, but Saquon Barkley did have 10 yards on 4 carries, and he did have a couple of catches. A.J. Brown was 5 catches on 6 targets in the first quarter for 67 yards. The Philadelphia Eagles were doing really, really well over the course of the first quarter, and it really set the tone. And even midway through the second quarter, when the Eagles scored their third and what would wind up being the final touchdown of the game, the Philadelphia Eagles were doing decently well. And then, towards the end of the first half, the Eagles started to let the foot off the gas and allowed the Dallas Cowboys to get back into this game with a touchdown as the game was going into halftime. And this has been the problem with the Philadelphia Eagles in several other games over the course of this year, is they've been allowing teams to hang around for too long. The Philadelphia Eagles were not able, after they scored that touchdown in the second quarter, were not able to get this game out of reach of the Dallas Cowboys. So the Philadelphia Eagles offense after that first quarter also started manifesting a lot of the same problems that we've been seeing over the course of the last several weeks, except for, realistically, the Minnesota Vikings game and the second New York Giants game. We started to see the same problems coming into play. The Philadelphia Eagles finished the game with 339 total net offensive yards, 63 of those coming on the ground, 276 of those coming through the air. Jalen Hurts did have one critical sack that really served to set up the Dallas Cowboys for their go-ahead field goal at the end of the game. Jalen Hurts finished 27 for 39 for 289 passing yards. He did have one touchdown through the air. That was a touchdown to A.J. Brown. The other 2 touchdowns that the Eagles scored were runs. They were Jalen Hurts runs. We had one tush-push touchdown, and then we had another designed Jalen Hurts run that scored the other 14 points. The Philadelphia Eagles, throughout the second half of this game, and really throughout the second half of the second quarter, did not do what they needed to do to put the game out of reach. And that was the problem. I went into this game, I said in our preview episode that the Philadelphia Eagles really needed to score 27 points in order for them to be comfortable. And before we go any further, if you're saying that the Philadelphia Eagles lost this game in part because the defense didn't do what it needed to do, and we will absolutely talk about the defense, because the defense is definitely responsible for giving up 24 unanswered points, but the Philadelphia Eagles offensively went, after their first 3 drives, which were touchdown, 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 the Philadelphia Eagles offensively got the ball off an interception, went 3 and out. Then they had the end of half. Then they went 3 and out to start the second half. Then they went 6 plays but wound up having to punt the ball. Then they had another 3 and out. Then they missed a field goal. Then they fumbled the ball. Then there was also a fumble that occurred on a punt that the Dallas Cowboys had. And then the Eagles had a 5-play drive at the end of the game, starting on their own 2-yard line, that resulted in them punting the ball. That was thanks to the Jalen Hurts sack. So there were plenty of opportunities for this Philadelphia Eagles team to string together drives where they were able to come away with the victory, and they just didn't do it. And there were a lot of the same things that we were seeing. We were seeing very bad play calling. We were seeing the Eagles playing from behind the sticks many, many, many times. The Eagles had 14 penalties over the course of this game, which cost this Philadelphia Eagles team 96 yards. Now, while penalties can go both ways, and that does include the Philadelphia Eagles defensive penalties as well, and there were definitely problems in that, there were plenty of offensive penalties that killed drives and set the Eagles up. There were a number of times where the Eagles were playing 1st and 20, 1st and 25, and it's very difficult to recover from that because you're shooting yourself in the foot. The Eagles went 5 for 12 on 3rd downs over the course of this game, and that is simply not an acceptable statistic there for the offense. The Eagles, it's definitely one of their better 3rd down performances, but it definitely was not a good look for this team. Now, if you do want to look at a couple of positives on the offense, first off, A.J. Brown is back in decent enough form. 8 catches on 10 targets for 110 yards and that 1 touchdown. Devontae Smith went 6 catches for 89 yards, including a immaculate 41-yard reception that set the Eagles up for another touchdown in the early portion of the game. But you can also say that the Eagles did a really good job in the red zone. The Eagles were 3 for 3 in the red zone, 2 for 2 when they got into goal-to-go situations. All of that happened before the Eagles let their foot off the gas. And the Eagles did not have to let their foot off the gas, and probably should not have let their foot off the gas, because the Philadelphia Eagles were still up by just 2 scores at the end of the first half. So there was still 30 minutes of football left to play. The Eagles were not in a position to coast. And it felt like the offense was coasting for most of the second half of the game. And when the offense had to turn it on and try to turn up the urgency, they were met with an incredible defensive performance by the Dallas Cowboys that made them look like they were superstars. Or the Eagles committed critical, horrifically bad mistakes. Saquon Barkley fumbled the ball on what was a pretty good play by the Dallas Cowboys. And then after the Philadelphia Eagles were able to stop the Cowboys on a 5-play, 17-yard drive that resulted in a punt, that was fielded, and Xavier Gibson fumbled the ball and gave the Cowboys the ball with a goal-to-go situation. But more than that, the Philadelphia Eagles offense has gotten very predictable, and that comes down to Kevin Patullo. There were multiple times over the course of this game where every time the Philadelphia Eagles seemed like they were ready to run, the Cowboys stacked the box. And that's why you have somebody like Saquon Barkley only getting 22 yards on 10 carries. Jalen Hurts had more rushing yards than Saquon Barkley. He had 33 yards on 7 carries, including the longest run of 8 yards. And Jalen had both of the Eagles' rushing touchdowns. So it felt like the Cowboys were ready for everything that the Eagles were throwing their way once the second half rolled around. And whatever adjustments are being made offensively, they seem to do the Eagles more harm than good. And all of that comes down to Kevin Patullo and the play calling that he is effecting. Now let's talk about this Philadelphia Eagles defense, because you don't lose a game like this without the defense not showing up. And even if the offense is sputtering, you can count on the defense to be really, really good in terms of the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles defense has shut down 2 really strong opponents in the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions over the course of the last couple weeks, holding them to less than 10 points for each of those 2 teams. So I don't know whether or not this was a situation where the Philadelphia Eagles defense really was riding the struggle bus after having to do that, or they were just tired of being overtaxed or what have you. There were also a number of injuries that factored into that. Notably, Reed Blankenship had to leave the game. We had Mora Ajomo spend some time on the sideline. We had quite a number of players who the Eagles were dealing with injury over the course of this game, and definitely raised a lot of alarm bells in that regard. But the Philadelphia Eagles defense was able to, again, in the first half, get out to a really, really strong start. In the first half of the game, they held Dak Prescott to 13 for 17 for 159 yards. Not as good as Jalen Hurts in terms of the yardage. Jalen Hurts in the first half was 13 for 19 for 163. A little bit better in the completion percentage, but not quite as good in terms of yardage. And while Dak did have a passing touchdown in the first half, he also threw an interception that was thrown right to Reed Blankenship. It was a little bit of a bad look for Dak, but very heads-up play by Reed Blankenship there. Additionally, the Eagles forced a fumble in the first half of the game. Kevondre Turpin was on a run and wound up slipping up and wound up having the ball just pop right out of his hands, and the Eagles were right there ready to recover it. So the Philadelphia Eagles defense in the first half of the game really was firing on all cylinders just as well. In fact, the Eagles defense should have probably forced 2 more turnovers in the second half, maybe even a third if you want to count the fumble that rolled out of bounds on a late Cowboys drive. But you had the Eagles defense shooting themselves in the foot with penalties. There was a 12 men on the field penalty that negated a Philadelphia Eagles pick. And then you had another one that was right in the hands of Zach Bond, and he just could not come down with it. Now, there were a lot of really solid third down, fourth down, goal line stops that kept the Eagles' offense in the game that the defense deserves a lot of credit for. But the Eagles' defense also allowed a number of really large plays that definitely did not look good and definitely added to a lot of the agitation surrounding this team. Because the Philadelphia Eagles defense, the Vic Fangio model, is very much a bend but don't break kind of model, and the Eagles defense was doing a lot of bending. The Dallas Cowboys came away with 473 total net offensive yards. Dak Prescott finished the game 23 for 36 for 354 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 1 sack over the course of the game. That was another thing, too. The Eagles were not able to get pressure, not able to get a whole lot of anything going on in the offensive backfield. The Eagles did have, again, 1 sack thanks to Nakobe Dean. There were 6 quarterback hits over the course of the game. Nolan Smith had 2. We had Jalen Carter, Nakobe Dean with the QB hit, Jalix Hunt, and Jalen Phillips all getting in the mix there. But realistically speaking, the Philadelphia Eagles defense, especially as the game progressed, seemed very, very, very unable to get any kind of pressure or any kind of anything going in the backfield against Dak Prescott. Now, again, I did mention a couple of standout folks. Nakobe Dean with the sack. We had Zach Bond with a combined 9 tackles. Reed Blankenship, before he left the game, had 8 combined tackles and the interception. Zach Bond also recovered the Cowboys' fumble that occurred in the first half of the game. So there was definitely a lot for this Philadelphia Eagles defense in the first half of the game that went well. But in the second half of the game, the Cowboys seemed to find ways to take advantage of the Philadelphia Eagles defense. And to their credit, the Dallas Cowboys offense is definitely a stronger suit for them. This game was the Cowboys offense versus the Philadelphia Eagles defense in terms of strengths. This Philadelphia Eagles defense should have, if it wasn't for a lot of the mistakes that they committed, and again, penalties factor into that. There were a lot of missed tackles. There were a lot of times where they were not able to just wrap somebody up and bring them to the ground, and instead, the Cowboys were getting a lot of yards after contact. So while we can probably pin this blame quite a bit on the offense, and justifiably so, because the offense was non-existent for most of the game, the Philadelphia Eagles defense finally seemed to have some of the work that they were putting out over the course of the last couple weeks catch up to them, and it really showed. But at the end of the day, I keep coming back to this idea of accountability, because that is something that Nick Sirianni preaches. It's one of his core values. Connection, competition, accountability, football IQ, and fundamentals are his 5. And accountability right in the middle there is a really, really important one. And I keep coming back to this because the Philadelphia Eagles have to learn from the mistakes that they commit. And they don't seem to be doing that. If you're going to be truly accountable, accountability can't stop with, yep, my bad. It has to continue with, yep, my bad, we're going to fix this. Or I'm going to fix this. And I see the Eagles making the same mistakes game in and game out. And there is no seeming growth when you're making the same mistakes game in and game out. That's not accountability, even if you own up to it. In fact, there's a saying about doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So we'll see what the Eagles are able to figure out in the next couple of days before the Black Friday game at 3 o'clock against the Chicago Bears. But the Philadelphia Eagles don't have a lot of time to fix the mistakes that they seem to keep making. And if they can't do that, well, it's not going to be a great end of the season for this team. But as always, let me know what you think in the comments below. What are your thoughts about this game? What went well? What didn't go well in your opinion? Was there anything I missed? Let me know. And thank you so much to everyone for tuning in to the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, and iHeartRadio. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles and NFL coverage. And if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles.